Welcome to a new AF Chats. My name is Ariel, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of AppFigures. And we hold these every month to talk with someone in the industry who knows what they're talking about, so we can learn from their experience, which is really the best way to learn, in my opinion, or the way I learn best. This month, we have Ian from the BBC, and we're going to be talking about competitive intelligence and how it can be used to get more downloads, both in a technical perspective and also from an organizational perspective. Ian has a lot to share on that subject. We spoke before, and it was quite amazing. So thank you for joining us, Ian. If you can give the quick, who is Ian?
Well, my name's Ian. I work for the BBC in the Children's and Education Department. I'm a senior data analyst specializing in ASO and SEO. I've been doing SEO for about a decade now, and recently I've been really starting to focus on the ASO. The BBC Children's and Education Department, we've got 4 main apps, and they're the largest portfolio of apps targeted at the under 5 market in the UK. We reach about 20% of 0 to 5-year-olds in the UK on a weekly basis. But then I also consult internally on 4 big products, which are iPlayer, BBC Sounds, BBC Sport, and BBC News. And they've got their own apps, which are pretty dominant in their own market, their own sphere.
Suffice to say, you see quite a few things.
Yeah. It's incredibly busy, but incredibly rewarding. So
I can only imagine. I think one of the coolest things is to be able to see different apps and how ASO or SEO or any sort of change impacts one audience versus another. So that's really cool, and that's the kind of experience that I always love hearing about, because knowing how things work and seeing how things work just different enough that you have to find the overlap, in my opinion. Very cool. So today we're going to be talking about the impact of competitor intelligence. I have spoken about competitor intelligence before. I've written guides about competitor intelligence before. And to me, seeing what other people do with their apps on the App Store and Google Play is a really easy way to learn what works and what doesn't. But beyond that, it also gives the ability to set benchmarks and figure out what you can actually achieve in a specific segment, in a specific niche, and to see if you're doing better or worse than those around you, because that's kind of always a big question. If you're seeing a spike of downloads and you did nothing for it, is that luck? Is that coincidence? Is that just the market being the market? And so there are different applications. All of them eventually lead to more downloads. And I think we can start by thinking about the concept of kind of being blindfolded when you do ASO, or even when you do SEO, when you do any sort of optimization. When you don't know what others are doing and how it's working for them, it's kind of difficult. You just before this, Ian mentioned that he is the power user of analytics, or is known to be the power user of analytics. And so to me, that means clicking a lot of buttons, but also being interested in a lot of data. And curiosity is really what fuels a lot of what I do. So how do you see competitor intelligence as when you get into competitor intelligence? How do you actually use it at a high level?
Well, I think, as you were saying, unless you know what your competitors are doing and how they're performing, it's next to impossible to gauge the effectiveness of your own efforts and how you're actually performing. Because as you say, if you have a spike in downloads, was that due to some overall movement in the market, or was that down to some activity that you undertook? So within, the BBC is a very, very large organization, a very, very slow moving organization in a lot of ways, and also very internally focused. So it can often be very, very surprising when you present internal stakeholders with clear information like, one of our competitors did this and this was the result. And that can often really wake people up and be a wedge through which you can cause change. So since we've started to, for each one of the apps, we compare ourselves against a basket of competitors, which also gives us a much better ability to calibrate how the whole market is moving. That's really helped us, not just with ASO efforts, but with the wider marketing as a whole, because it's much easier for us to now compare all the impact of the trails that we run on TV, or the different periods of seasonality that we're attempting to target, which our audience relate to. So yeah, I would say since we started really focusing on both market and competitor intelligence, those have become, key measures which we're measuring ourselves against.
That makes so much sense. And you touch on so many different things by talking about how you use it. On the one hand, there are things that you can only see when you know that your competitors, you know their downloads, their trends over time. And we can get into that in just a little bit. But one of the things that I always found interesting is just having knowledge, or just having this sort of desire to optimize in a larger organization isn't always met with, yes, let's do it immediately. And
Yeah.
so what are the kind of ways that you use this sort of data to show that this is a necessity, as opposed to just say we should do something?
Yeah, well, I think that's as large as the BBC is, resources are relatively scarce, and I'm sure that's the case, in many organizations where maybe
Yeah.
apps aren't the sole focus. I'm sure that's how it is. And any change that you want to make has a resource overhead. So really, it's especially since we're publicly funded, which brings up a lot of differences. Often, if you're able to show, our competitors, especially if you have a portfolio of high-level commercial competitors, and they're all doing the same thing, and especially if the biggest ones are doing it the most, then it's very easy to come and say, look, I know this is going to require time and resources, which are limited, but it's worth testing. And that's the other thing that I think is really important, is that for me, often that competitor intelligence, that knowledge of what other people are doing, allows you to bring that case to somebody who's going to sign it off and say, well, look, let's just test it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we've got the analytics, we've got the data, so it's worth trying it. And as I say, if you've got the proof that the people that that they're at the top of the market, again, due to the analytics and the market intelligence, then they're probably going to take that risk.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense. And I always talk about experimenting and how that's a good way of moving forward. And I think having, just a seed of data to kick that off makes a lot of sense. Are there particular KPIs that you found work best when you try to explain, hey, we should do this because that, and you use those KPIs in their place?
Yeah, well, I think I speak to a very very wide range of stakeholders, like from editorial to marketing to the promotions outreach team, because the BBC is quite large and fragmented. So one of the core metrics that we focus on is category rank, because it's very, very easy for people across the organization to understand. We rank number one in kids on the App Store for this period of time, and that was when we made this change, or we did this. So that's very, very powerful. But then equally, if you can say, well, 3 weeks ago, and somebody else did X, and that resulted in change Y, we should be doing the same. So again, I find that is a metric which it's easy to comprehend, no matter who you are, and people naturally want to be number one in that category. It's just the way it is, isn't it?
That makes sense. It is good for business to be number one.
Oh, of course.
So I think that's a win-win.
Yeah.
So simplicity, basically, it's given you by looking at what's happening outside of the organization. You can easily say we should be, in order for us to be also number one or number two or number three. This is what we have to do, and this is the level
Yeah.
we have to do. And then you can go in and start supplementing with how do we do it? Is it App Store optimization, organic? Is it paid ads? Is it outside of the App Store type stuff? So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and also I think, especially with a legacy organization like the BBC, where you know, and I'm sure this is the case for a lot of other larger organizations that were maybe doing something else before, and digital is sort of like they're transitioning into digital. Um, Lots of the departments are really hungry for that data because they've never been exposed to it, and often it can be a revelation to them to be like, oh, we've actually got this way to measure our impact, which we can really quickly get feedback on. It's not like surveys, it's not like things that are going to come much, much later down the line. And them being able to see that impact and to see the change, once that's happened a few times, they really start to get enthusiastic about it. And, they really start to buy into it and be like, yeah, can you keep us updated on that? Can you tell us, the latest thing, what the store's promoting? And that's really the journey that I've seen them, from being in the BBC.
That's pretty insightful. I think the idea here is that you're not only creating interest and sparking this sort of interest in something that everyone understands quickly, but then you also have a metric to continue to show them what works and what doesn't. So as you experiment,
Yeah.
you can say, well, this did work, and now our rank is up, or rank is down, or this is up and down.
And that, I think that's also a big challenge, is sort of like getting into that testing mindset where it's like, we're going to test this and it's okay if it fails, because that can be the hardest thing. And it's like, look, we're going to test all these things and some of them aren't going to work, and that's okay, because we are also going to find things that do work. Because that mindset of like failure is okay sometimes is sometimes a little alien to some places.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Do you find that using data, it's easier for you to justify experimenting as opposed to like doing what used to work before, maybe outside of the App Store and pre-app digital world?
Yeah, absolutely. Because not only in terms of looking at our competitors and saying they're doing something differently, and especially if they change and start to do something differently, especially I'm thinking in store assets and in terms of maybe because the children's space is really seasonal, so like what maneuvers they're making around different seasonal events, but also with the with the A/B testing on stores, just the ease of, especially in the Google Play Store, just the ease of setting that up. It was very easy to bring along the idea of being like, well, why don't we just start testing font combinations? Why don't we just start testing background color? And starting that journey of just being like, well, we should just constantly be changing these things, because occasionally one will pop and give us a few extra, give us a percentage uplift. I think that has been really helpful.
That's very interesting. I love the idea of A/B testing in general, and I think that Google Play does make it possible where Apple doesn't. Do you look at competitors before you make A/B tests? So you look at a competitor that maybe had a spike in downloads after a change and say, well, they have a dark background with light text, or they show this element versus another.
Well, a while ago, one of the main things that we noticed was one of our major competitors, just before they had an absolutely giant worldwide spike in downloads. And I'm not saying this is like the thing that caused it, but it was part of the package of things that they were doing as part of this huge push. Was that they, for their brand, they'd started to put like screenshots, but then huge pictures of their like main branded character next to them. And that just sort of unlocked a little thing in our head where it was like, oh yeah, we don't have to just prioritize, we don't have to just prioritize the screenshots. We can start making, more of our just iconic branded assets and just start to pull those out more. And doing that, that, it didn't provide, a huge uplift, but it provided a small uplift. And I'm a firm believer with A/B testing, most of the times, that's what you're aiming for, that slow incremental climb up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I found in my own A/B tests too, because if you are doing testing around keywords, then your on-page assets are really all about conversion.
Yeah.
So you're really improving more than just, you're not just adding a few downloads. That's what you would get by changing your keywords, but you're turning more of those page views into downloads. And if your conversion rate is already 100%, which I think is unlikely, then you've done it. And then all you have to do is get more traffic onto the page, but that's unlikely, and for most companies that's not really it. So any small improvement in conversion can have a massive impact.
Yeah, and also, as I was saying, due to the as I said, the children's space is very, very seasonal. So what we've also found is that if you get that, so for example, Halloween and Christmas, and it's like if you get that Halloween window exactly right in terms of when do we make it spooky and how long do we make it spooky for, that's when you see a real, it can be crazy increases in conversion rate.
Interesting.
And it's but literally, it's like if you go a day over, the spooky season, conversion rate crashes. And it's equally true for some of the smaller holidays like Easter and I'm trying to think of and Christmas has a longer window, but yeah, we found that to be very, very powerful. So if you get it right for that time period, you can absolutely skyrocket.
Is that true for the beginning as well?
For the beginning of Halloween?
Yeah.
It basically ramps up, parabolically till the peak of Halloween day, and then it crashes. Pretty much the day after Halloween, because it's yeah, it's done now. I'm not interested. I'm getting ready for Christmas now. So.
Wow. So the beginning can be, you can play with that a little bit, but at the end, if you don't trim it really where it's supposed to, you can lose downloads.
Yeah. What we've said, what we've kind of got a saying now, which is that stopping seasonality is far more important than when you start it.
Oh, wow.
Because obviously people are moving up to a holiday, but once the holiday's over, nobody wants to know about it.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Yet I never thought about this.
Yeah, it's from what I understand, that is also true with the sports app. So because once that particular, I'm no expert in sport, but once the final or the event has happened, conversion crashes.
Yeah, I can totally see that. That makes a lot of sense. There's a question from the audience from Andrew who's asking, what improvement percentage do you aim for as a threshold, I believe, relating to A/B testing, which kind of relates to this. We said small. What does small mean for you?
For small, generally for me to really be okay, I think that worked. I say about 5%. 5% over multiple tests, because anything else I'm it's too close to the margin of error for my liking.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'd say.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the questions that I get often regarding A/B testing is what to do when the results aren't statistically significant. What do you do in that case?
Well, what we've found is that, if a test is taking a very, very long time to come to conclusion, often we'll just pull it because we're it's not a significant enough change. And we also, in my thinking, it's also, it's an opportunity cost, because you could be, if it's taking you ages to get something that's going to register. If it's taking a long time, it's probably going to be a marginal increase anyway. It may not even be marginal enough for you to really believe it. So you've got the opportunity cost that you could be testing something, you could be testing lots of smaller improvements during that time. And I am a believer in you know, A/B test 4 different, like for font combinations, for example. If you're A/B testing font combinations, do 4 at the same time and make them really, really radically different. Because the more radical the change you make, the quicker it's going to become apparent this worked or this didn't work. So I'm kind of an opinion that if possible, you should make the changes as extreme as is reasonable, as you're willing to accept as a possible new asset. Simply because then you can keep things rolling.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, even though we're not supposed to spend too much time on A/B testing, but I love A/B testing, and this is really insightful. But how do you A/B test something like something so seasonal? So, for example, Halloween or Christmas. Do you run A/B tests early in the season, as early as possible, and then kind of drag them on, or do you run A/B tests throughout on a small number of a small percentage of traffic?
No. So basically last year we went through. All our seasonal periods were like classified as testing ones. So we were just running, seasonal versions of the app versus non-seasonal versions. And that was where we were able to really sort of finally discern what the different, periods were and what the different conversion changes were. Interestingly, that also aligned with Google Trends data for the, for just the broad search term of Halloween or Christmas or whatever else. So definitely for some forms of seasonality, I think Google Trends search data can give you a good idea about definitely where the peak is and where you might want to start your seasonal campaign.
Interesting. Oh, that's super insightful. Maybe we should do another one of these just on A/B testing. I think that would be fun.
Oh, I couldn't think of anything better.
Whew, okay. Well, you all heard it. We're doing another one of these on A/B testing at some point in the future. It's on record now. But cool. So that is really a lot about conversion. And you can see from competitors, you can get ideas from competitors for these sort of what to do, especially around the extremes. What is an extreme? And that's why I love looking at competitor data, because that gives you more of a max and a min, and you kind of can do whatever you want in between. But do you go about doing something similar when it comes to keywords and looking at maybe keywords you didn't think about before, or long tail keywords?
Yeah, well, so, on the kids apps, there are four main, we've got four main kids apps. We've got Playtime Island, which is like a generic children's gaming app. We've got Go Explore, which is like more educationally focused. We've got Get Creative, which is sort of, like drawing and painting and all that sort of stuff. And then we've got Storytime, which is for stories. So you can imagine those are four, even though they're all in children's, they're all four distinct propositions within that. And that means that, the competitor profile for each one of those is very different, and it's very, very wide, because it means that in some cases you are competing against, other global brands that are also targeting the kids market, but then you're also going against, smaller apps which are maybe just camping, which are offering one kind of experience, just camping one kind of keyword. And I would definitely say, in the exploration of that and sort of mapping all those competitors and sorting them into like, oh yeah, this is a giant corporate, this is a smaller app that's just targeting one keyword. In that process, like the number of keyword ideas I got for each one of them, but also for the kids space as a whole, was like incredibly profitable. Like I'd never thought for Get Creative, which is the drawing app, to use Doodle as a core keyword, and it turns out that it's as important as draw. And again, this is probably specific to the BBC, but the BBC, there's this it's called Reithian idea that we're meant to be like proper, and do things properly. So traditionally we wouldn't use a word like doodle, but you've got to speak as your audience does and use the language that they are using. And so the competitor intelligence is very useful in that regard, to be like, look, I know it's unconventional for us, but maybe we should consider Doodle.
Interesting. How have you found? Why did you decide to try Doodle? Did you just put it into just to see data and get data out of it, or did you see competitors do it?
I saw a large number of competitors have it in
Mm.
their subtitle. And then once I started down the Doodle path, I found that there were, the competition for that keyword for apps that we in some way were really competing with was surprisingly fierce. So
Interesting. I mean, it does make sense because Doodle and Draw are just different ways people would talk about this. And I know in my experience, people tend to have sometimes different vocabulary than the one I have. And so I would
yeah,
expect something to work, and maybe it does. And that's why I always look at competitors, because if you look at something that a theory that you had in your mind and it works, you don't look at other things. I don't look at other things sometimes until I get to that report and I say, okay, let's see what others are doing because maybe I'm wrong. And I'll find weird combinations that I never thought of. And sometimes they're really popular too.
yeah. Well, that similarly, like until like one example of that is that I never realized that people, not loads, but again, it's a significant long tail keyword. Is that in the kids space, people really differentiate by children's age. So like age 3, age 4, age 5, or apps for 5-year-olds. And until I'd done the keyword research and was checking the competitors, I never would have thought that that's
Yeah.
because you just and I don't have a child of that age. So I was just like, oh yeah, kids, you just search for kids, but no, you're actually thinking far more specifically um, in those terms. So yeah.
I mean, if you think about who is downloading the apps, it would be the parents. So I would be in the same boat, thinking that parents are parents and they're looking for just keep my kids happy, get them to learn,
Yeah.
keep them entertained.
Yeah. And that's well, that just to go off topic a little bit here. That's one of the core things that the founder of Tokaboka, I always get that wrong. But the founder of Tokaboka, we have Toka Life, Toka World, he was very, very clear that there is basically a line that separates the 0 to 5s from the 6s to 9s and that sort of age. And that's when it shifts from the parents downloading it for the child to the child starting to have input. And what we've definitely seen is that once you shade into that demographic, I call it the Spider-Man line, because that's when they get into their own, they're like, yeah, that's cool, mum, but I want Spider-Man now. So again, it's just bearing in mind, who actually is your demographic and what language are they using to find your apps, what are they searching for and which categories are they looking at.
Yeah, that all makes sense. That all makes a lot of sense. I have a 2-year-old niece, so I know what brands can do to kids. And once you have a specific name, like a Spider-Man name, in their minds, that's it. They will drink the drinks that are not, at all tasty because it has that little, head on top of the bottle. They'll only watch that on TV. They'll only play that on their iPad. It's wild. And parents have to do that because otherwise it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
yeah,
ugh.
and we see it when you're looking at keyword volume, comparing brands for brands. You can see that there's, especially in the kids space, it's like, yeah, there's a number of, and I'm sure this is the case in a lot of industries, but there's a number of smaller players, and then there's just a few absolute giants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Names everyone gravitates towards. It's just the brand itself is probably more popular than most of the other keywords used to get to that brand. That's
Yeah.
interesting. There are 2 questions from the audience that I think kind of align with this. Andrew is asking, how often do you refresh keywords and other metadata normally?
Yeah. Well, we actually, well, what we found is that we seem to have the most success when we refresh Apple every month, and when we refresh the Google Play Store every 6 weeks. And that's not a major thing, but usually we tweak some assets, we maybe alter the keywords slightly if we're able to, but that is our the asset refreshments every 4 to 6 weeks, and then that's the keyword cycle that we're trying to get to. But it's we're trying to get there. We're trying to get there. But we do, yeah, store assets update 4 weeks on Apple, 6 weeks on Google Play Store.
That kind of aligns with what I know about the algorithm and the way how often it changes and the amount of data that it takes to really have stable results. Because you make changes and you'll likely, in most cases, on Apple side at least, immediately see some results, but they're not going to stick in most cases. And they're going to ebb and flow a little bit, and then eventually it will stabilize. And that's usually around the 3 to 4 week mark. And Google uses a much longer period of time for downloads and for ratings. So makes perfect sense.
Because looking at our historical data, this is like going way back. It's certainly the case that if you leave it for an extended period of time, that causes problems. We've definitely seen that. We've definitely seen that. If you forget about an app, or if you just leave it and like, oh well, I don't have anything to update, then the stores will be like, fine, if you're not interested in it, we're not interested in it. So
it's a good way to look at it, and also keeping in mind that everyone else is updating their app. So if an entire category goes stale for a year, that's going to make it very difficult for the algorithm to pick one of the stale ones to show off. But one of those will go out of that stale type of format, and boom, they win.
And that's one of the reasons why, especially over the last year, I've been really, really keen to push seasonality, because it's like, even if you maybe don't have feature updates in your app, or you've got nothing on the dev side coming, then there's usually something where you can at least hook into and it's two-sided. It's not only to make it look fresh for your audience and the users that you may want to acquire, but again, just to signal to the stores like, hey, yeah, we're still here, we still care.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think Andrew responded in the chat saying that they haven't updated their keywords in a year. If you're not updating your keywords every now and again, especially every like 4 to 6 weeks on average, then you're just not giving the algorithm enough to index you by, because ultimately the algorithm remembers. And so if you have one set of keywords now, and then you try another set of keywords in about a month, even if some of them are not good or some of them are less good than the ones before, the next month you can bring back that previous keyword set. And two, now the algorithm has maybe 125% keywords to index you by. So you get some benefit even if you don't do it right. And if you do it right, obviously you can double the number of keywords that you're ranking for. And so I see it as a win-win ultimately. And if you see that something is going wrong, you can make another change, and that's still keeping the app fresh. So it's, I think, harder to lose when you do make changes.
And I think that just feeds into the thing that I'm always keen to stress, which is that ASO, and really it's an iterative process, and that's not just A/B testing is obviously iterative, but I think you should have that view for all of it, because we are fortunate in that, generally speaking, you have the metrics to be able to measure it, and speaking earlier about how, maybe to the stakeholders, you just tell them about, oh, we rank #1 in kids in this store, and downloads are up 15% year on year. But you yourself, you have access to all those metrics, and you've got the time to sort of delve into them and understand them, and maybe, hopefully, find some correlation between them, so you can start to think, right, which of these do I really care about for when I have to report on these changes? Because I find generally, just general reporting, you've got maybe those 1 or 2 metrics that you report to stakeholders. But if a specific department's made a change, then they're usually, if you've already got them on board a little bit, they're usually willing to take the time to understand maybe these deeper metrics you're going to present to them to show, the kind of impact that the action that they undertook had.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you think about an update cycle of 4 to 6 weeks is pretty quick, regardless of whether you're a one-person shop, a small company, or a huge company that isn't necessarily app first. And so getting any company to move at that pace will require some sort of rationalization. You can just say, we should do it because I want to. I mean, you can, but I don't know if you'll get the same results. So if you were able to do that with this.
Yeah, but I think what's also key is what you were saying, which is, this idea that, well, we can always just revert it back. because the getting, for example, getting A/B testing, to and rightfully so, organizations can be very guarded about making changes to anything public facing. But if you can, get them to trust you to say, look, we're going to, iterate these changes, and if anything goes wrong, we can just revert it back, then, that can be very, very powerful. But I think there's always an institutional inertia against making radical changes in public facing assets. So.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest challenge that I see on the enterprise side. The companies that I speak with is we'll come up with a great way to integrate maybe some core keywords into the app's name.
And then we'll yeah.
You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And then we'll take some of the slightly less good keywords and the ones that combine really well with the name, and we'll put them into the subtitle. And then we'll work on a really great long tail strategy for the keyword list. And then a few weeks later, they'll make the change, or a month later, they'll make the change, and I will check it on my phone, and I see everything was changed except for the name. And the name is the most important part of that strategy because it cascades down from there. And I'll ask, what happened? Say, well, the stakeholders didn't feel like we should make changes to the app's name. Subtitle is fine. No one cares about that. Name, no. But then it really ruins everything.
Yeah.
Or it makes life very difficult if you're only optimizing your subtitle on a keyword list. Yeah. So any way to say we have to do this is a good way, and saying we can undo this is very helpful.
Yeah, because the title is the single most valuable piece of App Store real estate that you have. Number one keyword ranking field. It may be the only thing that they read before installing it.
Absolutely. I think that's the most visible part. The algorithm sees it first. The algorithm cares about it the most. If you don't update your app's name and you don't include keywords there, you're really leaving a lot on the table, and you just telling your competitors, go, you succeed.
I wish I could remember where I'd seen this example, but it was I can't. I think it was some kind of gaming app, but it was it was like a logged list showing their title changes, and it was crazy but impressive. Just the number of variation and changes they were putting after the hyphen of their name, like putting emojis in there, just like going absolutely bonkers. But eventually you notice that they obviously were finding things that were working, and then reducing the amount of variation. So I think if you're willing to commit to it, it can really be beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. I used to send emails without A/B testing subjects. And at some point, I started A/B testing subjects. I send a lot of emails, as some of you know. Some of you came from that email, from those emails. So now we have a system where every time we send an email, every email that goes out is A/B tested. It's all automatic. We put in the variations, and they handle themselves. They figure out which one is going to win, and then send with all of them. And that made a considerable difference. In the beginning, I didn't think it would make a difference. I thought, I know how to write email subjects. It's not that difficult. And it isn't, but it really is. It's the same about app names. It's not difficult, but it really is. Putting words in a sequence, not too difficult. Putting words in a sequence that would work both for Apple and for humans, it gets challenging. And depending on the audience, like you were saying before, if there's a very clear line between different ages, and you're really thinking more high level about parents, it's not going to be, it's going to be a hit or miss, and you want to minimize those misses, and iterations I find to be the best way to do that. And also learning from other companies' iterations works very well.
Because they've already done the research. Why not take those learnings for free?
Exactly.
Spending a few hours on the App Store just thoroughly researching your competitors is like a free university course.
Yeah, that's why the first thing I do every time someone asks me about an app and what should I do to improve, and I do this in my webinar with the live app teardown sessions that I did a few weeks ago, is I'll immediately just put them into the competitor's keywords report and see all the keywords that are going on between all of them. That's like the first thing that I do before I do anything else. And that just gives me an idea of what's going on, who's against who, who's winning, who's not winning, who's trying, who's not trying, and within seconds. If I couldn't do that, it would take forever. It would be discouragingly not going to happen.
Um, the question by Adam Holland, can I just answer that, because
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
really interesting. So how do you feel about refreshing app icons? Do you get any pushback from kids who become familiar with their app icon? Now, all of last year we were testing that exact question, and what we found was that so what we were doing was like seasonalizing the icons. So, adding seasonal elements to them to sort of communicate like, oh, you can have a Halloween experience in here. And we found that there was sort of a range of change that the audience would accept before it went too far out of that and started to impact it negatively. And the other thing that we found that was really interesting was that if the quality of the icon, if the quality of the seasonalized version of the icon wasn't as good as the one it replaced, then you would see a negative impact on conversions. So it's like the seasonality wouldn't compensate for the icon not being as nice. So what we found was that, there's a range which if you've got an audience that's really familiar with the icon, what we found was that there's a range. If you step outside it, you'll get a negative impact. And if the new one isn't as nice as the existing one, seasonality won't give you the boost you would expect, because the downgrade of the icon is negatively impacting it. So
that's really interesting. It makes a lot of sense when you say it.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling it took you quite a while to get here, to get to this
Yeah,
knowledge.
it took an incredible number of icon A/B tests. Yeah, I don't know how many, lots and lots and lots and lots.
Would you say there is one maybe A/B test that gave you the most knowledge, or gave you a good amount of knowledge, so it started really this way of thinking, or was it a lot of little ones that just eventually, after many, gave you an understanding of what's going on?
I think what we found was that sometimes you would make a change and it would be like immediately apparent. And for one of those, it was A/B testing a seasonal one against a non-seasonal one. And as soon as we tried the seasonal one, conversion rate plummeted. So it was very clear that, something had gone wrong there. But that meant we very quickly arrived at a conclusion. So, even though the test is seemingly negative, it's like, I was always, my thing is like, well, at least we know now. The audience really told us what they thought about us doing that. And then especially if you have one of those within a number of other similar tests you're doing, which are testing similar things, that's one of the reasons why I tend to fix on the idea of, like, oh, we're going to A/B test this sort of thing for this period of time. Because then hopefully you're going to stumble on either one that's going to go really positive or really negative.
Yeah, I think even a negative A/B test,
Yeah.
in a way, has the same value as a positive A/B test. It doesn't give you the downloads, but it gives you knowledge.
Yeah, well, and sometimes it's like, well, that's great, because now that's a whole area of thing we don't have to think about anymore. Because you're always thinking in your mind, oh, what about this? What about that? And if you have a negative A/B test, then you're like, great, that's a whole realm of mental pondering that I no longer have to go into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andrew has a few follow-up questions. One about which tool I was talking about just a few minutes ago, and that's the competitor keywords report inside the optimization section on AppFigures. So if you have an AppFigures account, just head into it, and you can put any competitors that you want, any apps that you want. Doesn't have to be a competitor. And if you don't have an AppFigures account, you can open a free trial and see it in action. So that's the tool. As far as the other question, the next question is, do most of your A/B tests come back negative? What would you say?
I would say most of our A/B tests come back, rather than come back negative, a lot of them come back flat, and you can just come to the conclusion that they don't really care about that. And again, that's useful to know. They don't hate it, they don't love it, they're not particularly bothered about it. We can move on to something else. And as I say, I'm also of the opinion that, like, cut it short. If it doesn't look like it's going anywhere, cut it short, because maybe you can find something that is going to produce a really strong negative or positive result.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because ultimately, the more curious you are, the more tests you're going to run. And the more tests you're going to run, you're going to get from, maybe the first test is going to be this really extreme change that will get some either love or hate. And then the more you do this, the more you come to this area where it's little things, maybe nuances around the size of a font, the family of a font, the weight of a font. And so if all those would come back positive, that means your initial set of screenshots, for example, was really terrible. Like, everything was wrong about it. And I think that's hard to do, or harder to do, to get it extremely wrong right up front. Not amazingly right is possible, but really bad is hard. So I think that's one of those, A/B tests is one of those things where you shouldn't really think in terms of success or failure. You should think in terms of, what haven't I tried yet? And then eventually you'll get there. That's my way of thinking about it. There's another question from Andre that's been open for a few minutes about conversion improvements. And is that used for surviving, fighting competitors, or to significantly improve numbers? How do you see A/B testing in that sense?
Well, I think that's a slightly difficult question, in terms of, is it like, keeping the product afloat or significantly improving our stats? So definitely in terms of, definitely. So for example, in the Halloween seasonality example, because what we'd noticed was that nearly all our major competitors were going really hard on Halloween, and I think the reason for that is, in the UK anyway, the days are short, people are inside more, the weather's poor, so they're in front of their devices. It's just before Christmas, and Halloween is so heavily pushed through all these different cultural experiences that they get, that it's just absolutely in the children's and the parents' minds. So we noticed that all our competitors were doing that, and there was a feeling like, well, we have to do this too, to be able to, we should be competing with them on that level and not losing out at that core moment of seasonality. So that was definitely about bringing ourselves up to our competitors' level. And then I would say the smaller incremental A/B tests, like, slightly altering the font, or just, playing with the assets, that's more just about delivering, incremental improvements to your app store listing. So I think you could broadly split the conversion improvements into those two groups. Sometimes it is going to be like, we need to improve this because we're sure our competitors are doing better. And then sometimes it's like, just business as usual, we're trying to push up that conversion rate. Because, if they're already on your page, you've got to do everything you can to try and get them to convert.
I think, to me, what you just said makes the most sense. So they're already on your page. You can convert them to keep up with a competitor, to survive. You can convert them to get more downloads. I think that matters less, as long as you try to push it forward. And if you're really behind, like in your first example, then that would get you to, maybe we're even now. But then you continue doing it, and you'll go more, you'll go farther. So I think it's really just where you are in that particular case. If you're a little bit behind, then you want to push and then continue to push forward. I think that the idea is you want to constantly improve, and that can mean keeping up with whatever else is changing, and it can also mean you just beating yourself and continuing and getting more of those page views and impressions, turning those into downloads, and it's a win-win either way. And then there's a follow-up question or related question from Christopher, who's asking, after you start an A/B test, do you look out for a novelty effect and for the effect to stabilize before coming to a conclusion about uplift?
Often, especially for tests that reach conclusion really quickly and show extremely strong statistical significance, we'll often run those a number of times. Often 3 times, just to be like, are we sure before we, sing about this to the rest of the team? Are we absolutely sure that this is real? So usually, because if the test is completed that quickly and the significance has been that strong, it should just do that again. So yeah, for any really like juicy ones, we say test them 3 times.
Do you find that it's more often that they will pass 3 times, meaning they will succeed 3 times, or do you find that sometimes the too fast is too not real, too good to be true?
I think that old saying rings true as ever. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. It would be great if you just found something that increased, your conversion rate 20%, but is it likely? So yeah, we've definitely had it where it's like, no, that was just a complete statistical fluke. But I would say, the ones which seem reasonable, where you're like, oh, we made this relatively large change, we got a 10% uplift, we did it again, it gave roughly the same result again. That definitely is real.
Yeah, that sounds ideal when it happens just like that.
Yeah.
Great. I think we have reached the end of our time. We can probably take another question or two, maybe. So if you have a question, now is a great time to throw it into Q&A. Otherwise, is there any closing remarks you wanna add, Ian?
No, just I would say find that if you are in a larger organization and you're having to persuade stakeholders about things, find that one metric that matters to them, as they say in lean analytics, and just get really good at communicating that to them, and I'm sure that will make your and their experience a lot more enjoyable.
A win-win. I guess one last question that came in through the chat, and that is, how many samples do you use for A/B tests? I think you mentioned 4 before.
Well, that often depends on like how drastic the change is and how quickly, how sort of long the window is we've got for it to come to conclusion. So if we're doing if we've got a longer period, we'll use more samples because it just gives us an opportunity to try and figure out which one of those is going to work best. If we've maybe only got a smaller testing window because the app's going to be updated or whatever, then we maybe just use 2. So often between 2 or 4, generally speaking. And the one app I'm especially proud of is definitely Playtime Island, the number 1 0 to 5 kids app in the UK. So go check that out.
That's great. On that happy note, it's a good time to end this. Thank you very much, Ian. This has been extremely insightful. I knew this would be insightful, and I had a feeling this would be fun, but it was funner and more insightful than I thought. And I think A/B testing and iterations is something that if someone is not doing or not thinking about enough, hopefully this webinar helped to push in that direction, because that's the best way to do it. You don't even need tools in most cases. It's more a mindset than it is an actual physical, task list. So hopefully that was the big takeaway. There's so many good takeaways. I can write a whole guide based on what we talked about today. So thank you very much for sharing all of this and bringing examples. This was a pleasure.
Me too. It was nice to be able to, talk about what's been going on at the BBC.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll do this again and talk just about A/B testing.
Oh, I'd be more than happy to spend an hour talking about A/B testing.
Alrighty, you all heard it.
All right.
Alrighty.
See you later,
everyone.